Hello friends, my name is Hannah and welcome to my November wrap-up. I had a good reading month in November, I think. I don't judge whether my reading is going well or not well purely based on the number of books that I'm reading, but this was the most number of books I read in a single month so far this year. I read 17 books. Which I'm kind of surprised by because a lot of them were non-fiction, and I filmed a video at the start of November about how I wasn't really sure that I was feeling this non-fiction November, and in that video I give lots of recommendations of books for people who are maybe slightly reluctant non-fiction readers, which, as a sidebar, by far the most popular video I've ever put up on my channel, so great and good, and if you haven't checked it out yet, I've linked it down below. And yeah, I took my own advice and I read a lot of essay collections and memoir this month. Didn't kind of force myself to go too into heavy non-fiction, and I think that was the right call. So I'm going to start by talking about all of the non-fiction books that I have read this month, and I'm going to apologise if I am a little bit scattered in that I've just got back home. It's Sunday night, and I've been out for my friend CK's birthday. We had a lush afternoon tea, but I am so full right now. I'm so full. So if at any point I look a little bit queasy, probably nothing to do with the books. The first book I read this month was Butts, A Backstory by Heather Radke. I listened to this on audio, and it was read no, it wasn't read by the author, it was read by Emily Tremaine, who's one of my favourite audiobook narrators. And this, I'll be honest with you, I picked this, I saw it on Scribd, I picked it solely based on cover and name. What can I tell you? I am a marketer's dream. And it is kind of what it sounds like. It's a cultural history of the backside. It looks at trends throughout history, what we can learn about how women are perceived, sexualized, objectified, fetishized, particularly women of color, and even more specifically Black women, throughout history. And it was really interesting. I thought it was maybe going to be a little bit silly, and don't get me wrong, Heather Radke does have a really good sense of humor, but she's approaching it in a very well-researched, very thorough way. So if you are interested in kind of feminism, but also social anthropology, and representations of women through time, and you like a kind of niche entry point, I think this would be a good place to look. I read The Making of a Man and Why We're So Afraid to Talk About It by Obioma Ugoala, and this is a memoir. I was a bit confused by this book at first. So I at the start of Nonfiction November, I went back through all of the saved titles on Scribd. Sorry, it's not even called Scribd anymore, is it? Everand. And I went back through all the titles that I'd saved and was like, right, I'm gonna pick a title that's like really far back in my saved list. And I saw this title and I had no memory of putting it on my saved list. But having done like a surface level piece of research, the book has changed its name. So when I saved it, it was under its original title of The Problem with My N, redacted penis. It was The Problem with My Normal Penis, but obviously, yeah, made to look like you mean something else. And why people are so scared to talk about it. And that was the book that I'd saved. I think it is the same book, but for whatever reason, they changed the title. And I think I understand why. So I thought, because I didn't, Obioma Ugoala is a actor. I didn't know that. and the book is a memoir, and I didn't know that. So I thought going into it, it was going to be more of more like kind of a bit like the previous one, like a examination of the sexualization and fetishization of Black male bodies, and I thought that that would be a really interesting counterpoint to the book that I'd read previously. But actually it turns out that while those themes are part of the book, it is more of a memoir, and so for that it just wasn't 100% what I was expecting. I did think there were interesting points raised, but I do think that there is a reason that they changed the title, because I do think the title implied it was going to be a different kind of book, and I would have liked more kind of engagement in like social history, social theory and research around that topic, just because that's what I was interested in, because I do think there is a real problem in Western culture, possibly other cultures, but I'm less familiar with them, around expectations of Black men, particularly when it comes to sexual performance. And I thought that that would be a really interesting thing to read about. So it's not that Obioma hasn't had an interesting life and he doesn't have interesting anecdotes to share, particularly from like how he's been cast in certain things. But yeah, it wasn't 100% the book that I thought it was going to be. So I didn't love it, but also I went into it expecting something else. Then I read an essay collection. This is another one that I picked based on the cover. I just really like the tortoise. This is Bomb Shelter by Mary Laura Philpott, which is a selection of kind of memoir type essays, mostly about her life and her family, a little bit about work. But a lot of them center around her son. So when her son was 16, they woke in the middle of the night to him having a really violent seizure in the bathroom, and a lot of the essays are them trying to deal with trying to find a diagnosis for him, because there's all sorts of different seizure disorders or various things that could cause someone to have a seizure, particularly an adolescent person. And so a lot of it was kind of about that she's talking a lot about love. The subtitle is Love, Time and Other Explosives. And there is a lot about love and death and loss in there. I thought a lot of them were interesting. I kind of enjoyed listening to it, but not a lot has stayed with me, except for one essay. I do really remember the description of that night, actually, where her son had the seizure, but then also they have a tortoise, hence why the tortoise is on the cover, that comes to, it's not their tortoise, it just kind of appears in their back garden every day for like food, and they think of it as theirs, and then the tortoise disappears for a little while. And she wrote an essay about her family's relationship with the tortoise, which I thought was really sweet. But yeah, on the whole, like, absolutely fine. I wasn't blown away by it. And then the next book I read, I think is this going to be the most read book this month from all people? Maybe. I read The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. I listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by Michelle Williams. And I mean, where to start? I do think it's really hard to just generally to talk about memoir sometimes in a reviewing context, because it's sort of like, what am I going to say? Like, I didn't really like that person's life. But I did really enjoy, is probably not the right word. I did really appreciate this book. I've said this a couple of times to various people, but for me, knowing what we kind of know now about the conservatorship that Britney was under for a large part of her career, this book felt like a horror story, in the sense that, like, she wasn't really, I don't think she was being dramatic or exaggerated in her writing. It's just, in like a horror film, when you can see what's coming, but the characters can't. that's what this felt like. You could just see the sort of steps that were being taken to maneuver her out of her own autonomy, and it was a lot. And also, I feel like everyone is saying this, but Michelle Williams' narration was like perfection. She kind of she's not doing an impression of Britney Spears, because I feel like that would be like really trite and on the nose, but she does sort of change the cadence of her speech so that it sounds a little bit more like the rhythm of Britney Spears's speech, so that I forgot that it was Michelle Williams reading it a lot of the time. So yeah, that was enjoyed. You know what I mean. The next book is one that I think I saw recommended on Instagram, and it was Bite Back. Let me get the proper subtitle. Feminism, Media, Politics, and Our Power to Change It All by Hannah Ferguson, and this was read by the author. So this is a book which at the start I thought I was really going to like this. It sort of reminded me a little bit of the play that Jodie Comer was in, Prima Facie. Oh, my Latin is not great, but this one, I'll put the poster up. It reminded me a bit of that, in that Hannah Ferguson is working in the sort of legal space, and for part of her job she was transcribing witness statements of sexual assault survivors, and that was the starting point for the book, which then goes on to discuss issues of sexual violence against women in, and kind of more broadly brings in media and politics, as the subtitle suggests. I had kind of two main issues that stopped me really engaging with this book. It was so thoroughly researched, and I really appreciate that. One is that Hannah Ferguson is Australian. That's obviously lovely, but it meant that a lot of the examples she was giving, quite rightly, were Australian examples. So she was talking about politicians and kind of figures in Australian entertainment culture that I just was not familiar with, and I think I felt like I wasn't fully understanding what was going on and who these people were, and also some of the like ways that the constitutional arrangement of Australia is not something that I am very familiar with. And so I just think there were some technical bits that I just wasn't quite understanding. And then the other kind of thing that I wish there'd been more of it was a lot of explaining what the issues were, but what had drawn me to the book when I saw someone recommend it online was that second part of the subtitle, the Our Power to Change It. And I was really interested in that because it's such a complex issue, and you know, I thought I was looking for some practical steps, which I just felt like they weren't really there. The vibe was sort of like, we just need to do better, and we need to advocate better, and we need to call out behaviour better. And I'm like, well, yes, I don't disagree with you, but I was hoping for something more than that. But if you're watching this and you're Australian and you're interested in that, I think you might get a lot more out of it than I did, because I just feel like some of those like cultural and social touchstones that she was using just didn't have any resonance for me, because I didn't know who she was talking about a lot of the time. So there was that, and then another essay collection stroke memoir I read, Quite. Love, Life and Eyeliner by Claudia Winkleman. I love Claudia Winkleman. Is there a single person alive who doesn't? I just think she's funny and cool, and yeah. And this selection of essays really felt like she was just having a chat with you about some of her opinions on things. So there are really touching essays in here about her relationship with her husband and her relationship with her kids. Particularly, she's writing it at the point when, like, I think her eldest child is maybe going to be going off to university quite imminently, and she's struggling with her identity as a mother, and the fact that she's not going to have them around all the time. And then there were really silly things like you know, the correct length for a fringe, at which point I am going to have to just, as a short fringe girly, I am going to have to disagree with Claudia that the longer the better when you come to a fringe. I can't, just like sensorily, I can't be dealing with it in my eyes. It needs to go up here. But other than that, I really enjoyed it. There was a great essay in there about the importance of napping, and that spoke to me on a deep and fundamental level. Like, do I think do I think any of the essays are going to change my life? No, but did it feel like if I listened to it with a cup of tea, like she was just there, just whittering away about stuff? Yes, it did, and I enjoyed that experience. So thank you very much. Then the final audiobook that I listened to for non-fiction November was another memoir, another celebrity memoir, in fact. It was Taste, My Life Through Food by Stanley Tucci. And I really enjoyed this one. I am a big foodie. And yeah, so the concept of this memoir really appeals to me, and I really enjoyed it. There was a lot, for me, there was a really great balance between talking through some of the really profound food memories and sort of how so many of our bonding experiences with people we love are often around the dinner table or around cooking or around eating together. And I thought it was really nice to kind of reflect on life through that prism. And it also touches on some, you know, really difficult things. Stanley Tucci lost his first wife to cancer when his children were quite young. And he also, which I didn't realise, had his own battle with cancer more recently, which I didn't know anything about. And it was, he had a tumour in his salivary gland, which threatened, you know, not only would he potentially not be able to speak after it was operated on, but, well, no, they couldn't operate it on after he'd had radiotherapy on it. He might have not been able to speak properly, but also he completely lost his sense of taste for a really long time. And so you'd spent most of the book with him talking about how important food was for him, how important it was. It was one of the main things that him and his second wife bonded over when they were first getting together, and how it has such a profound impact on his life. And then he kind of lost the ability to engage with that for a really long time. And yeah, that was really sad, but he's okay now, and his taste is coming back. But I think he's no longer able to produce saliva properly, so eating is no longer as enjoyable as it was for him, which is really sad. I thought the audio for this was an absolute delight. Stanley Tucci obviously has a great voice, and he's a brilliant actor, so the delivery was brilliant. However, I do wish I'd had a physical copy of it, because he does include recipes. Now, a lot of the food that he was talking about isn't even food that I can eat, because I don't eat animal products. But I still wanted the recipes, because I'm still pretty convinced I might be able to tweak them. So I might see if I can buy a copy of this. If I see it in a charity shop or like a secondhand bookshop, I'll definitely pick it up just for some of the recipes in it. But yeah, that was a delight. And then the final non-fiction book that I read was Queer: A Graphic History by Dr. Meg-John Barker and illustrated by Julius Scheele. This is pretty much what it sounds like. It's a graphic history, but I thought it was maybe going to be more of a social history. It's actually more of a theoretical history. It's more about the history of queer theory and the kind of academic understanding of queer identities, as opposed to more the lived experience of queer identities. So it wasn't 100% what I was looking for, but I do think it was a really great overview. If you're interested in queer theory, or you don't know that much about queer theory, it covers the whole gamut pretty much. but because it's covering such a lot of thought, it isn't obviously, and you wouldn't necessarily expect in a graphic format for this to be the case, but it doesn't go into a huge amount of depth on any of those theories really. And also, I don't know, I read this as an ebook from the library, and I thought the whole thing was going to be graphic. Like the whole thing was going to be illustrated, but it was more like you'd have these little sections and there'd be some prose and then a little cartoony infographic at the bottom. So it wasn't like, format wise, it wasn't 100% what I wanted either. But I do think like really great introduction, probably a good one to kind of dip in and out of if you had a physical copy of it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend reading it in an e-format unless you need to for accessibility reasons. But yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting, but it wasn't like necessarily what I want. You say to me a graphic history of queer, I was expecting more like queer rights, etc. It's not that. So just if it's been on your radar too, know that that's not what it is. But still interesting. And then we have, after a quick cough, the fiction. Had a good time with the fiction this month. The first 4 books I'm going to talk about, I'm going to whistle through quite quickly because I read them all for a vlog where I was reading books from my first haul that I did on this channel. I've only been here like a year if you're just finding me now, so it wasn't from like very long ago. It was around this time last year. And so the first one I read was Nesting by David Almond, and the TLDR on this is I found a short story collection that I like. If you're new here, I have a very patchy relationship with short stories. I don't often gel with them because I find them too short. Don't come at me for that. It's a personal preference. But I did really like these, and I think what I liked about them is David Almond, if you're not familiar with him, is a writer from the Northeast who's most famous for being a children's author. And these stories mostly were all written at the early stages of his career before he was really established as a children's author. These are stories for adults, but you can see the themes and preoccupations that lead him towards becoming a children's author are very, very prevalent in these early writings. So that was really interesting to read. And yeah, they're all, some of them have some magical realist elements. Some of them are just very much rooted in the Northeast and sort of telling mostly working class stories from the Northeast from different points in recent history. But I really enjoyed it, and all of the stories, I think, pretty much are really looking at grappling with the child's perspective, but particularly like that point when a child first becomes aware of the fact that adults have issues or trauma or problems, or really that moment when you kind of as a kid start to see that adults are not sort of possessors of all of the answers, or people who've necessarily figured stuff out, that adults can be broken and adults can be unsure and adults can be in need of help. And so yeah, I really enjoyed that. Then the second book that I read in that vlog was Dracula by Bram Stoker. Now, I tried to read this book when I was maybe 16 and I just didn't get on with it at all, and I'm really glad that I revisited it because I had a much better time the second time around. I particularly liked the first kind of 2/3 to 3/4 of the book. So I don't think I need to tell you what Dracula is about, but it is written as a series of like reportage, letters, diary entries of multiple characters who are slowly their narratives kind of move together all around Dracula. and trying to figure out who he is and what's happening. And I really liked the sort of watching the characters try and work out who this person is, what threat they pose, what's going on. And that kind of like unfurling of the mystery worked really well in the format that the book is written in. And then the last bit, once they kind of know who Dracula is and they understand the threat that he poses, it sort of becomes a bit more of like an adventure chase kind of story, which I just didn't think worked very well with the setup of the book, because by virtue of the way it's written with like letters and diary entries, it is always past tense. So you're always feeling like a little bit like you're not caught up in the action. So I really liked it. It was great to read kind of such a canonical text, because I do think perhaps I didn't quite give it credit for how kind of groundbreaking it was in the like genre. And yeah, really enjoyed most of it, and then just had a little bit of an issue with the kind of structure of the story towards the end. And Mina Harker, she's my girl. And then from Dracula to a much cuter vampire. I thought this was a graphic novel. This was lent to me by my friend Lula ages ago, so I can finally give it back to them. This, I thought, was a graphic novel, but it's actually more like a series of kind of individual cartoons and vignettes that follow two characters, a vampire, and I can't remember the vampire's name. Yeah, a vampire and a werewolf who fall in love, and it's very cute. Some of it's funny, some of it's silly, some of it's really sweet. But yeah, they're just kind of like nice little vignettes and snapshots of that, and it was a delight. I really would like some of the plates as prints, and I don't think Sarah Andersen sells them, which is a shame. But yeah, very cute. And then finally, the last book that I read in that vlog is Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki excuse me, tripping over my own tongue, Mizuki Tsujimura, which is translated from the Japanese by Philip Gabriel. And I really enjoyed this book. It's kind of a magical realist story in which a collection of adolescents in Japan who, for whatever reason, find themselves not at school, not regularly attending school, are essentially sucked into a castle via mirrors in their bedrooms. And in that castle, there is this character here who calls herself the Wolf Queen. And she sets them a task, which they have a year to complete. And essentially, whoever successfully completes that task will win a wish. And we are mostly following a young girl called Kokoro. And she, at the start of the book, is really struggling to engage with school. She's had kind of a nasty bullying sort of experience. And really, even though the task is happening and there's that kind of adventure fantasy element going on in the background, which I think on the whole was really well judged, it's really a book about kind of found family and finding your people and finding a sense of self-worth and not finding your worth in other people or other people's perception of you. So I really enjoyed it. I did see the twist coming, I think a little earlier on than maybe I was supposed to, but I don't think that got in the way of my enjoyment of the book. I still really enjoyed it. And I would read I wanted to read other things by her, but I don't know if this is just her only novel or maybe is her only one that has been translated into English, but it's sold really, really well. So hopefully there will be more because I enjoyed it. I then listened to the audiobook of Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller, which was read by Rachel Bavidge. And this is the opening scene of this book has like not left my brain since I read it. And this was the first book I read in November. So if you've been here a while and you're familiar with why my username is Hannah Lost the Plot, I have a terrible memory. And the fact that it has stayed with me tells you something about the impact of the writing. And it is an elderly woman going through her house late at night, and she dies at the start. And then what follows is her two children, who are middle-aged but have stayed living with her, have never left home, trying to figure out how to live without this matriarch who has really had a big impression on their lives, and in a large sense has controlled their lives, possibly without them realizing. And it's sort of about them kind of muddling through, but they are in real financial straits. They live in this little cottage that is on the land of like a large estate, like a fancy estate, not like a housing estate. And yeah, it's sort of this, it doesn't have a lot of plot, although I mean it does amp up towards the end of the book. There were points where I wasn't sure where the story was going to go, but I found it really impactful. It's a lot about society and how we support or don't support those who need us, but also the long-lasting impact and power of secrets and withheld information. And yeah, I thought it was, by the end of this book, I just felt very, very sad. Like, not in a bad way, but it made me sad. It made me very sad. Then I read the ebook of Sunburn by Chloe Michelle Howarth. Now, I haven't read Normal People, but I have watched the TV series, and I think I am justified enough to say that this is queer normal people. So this is following Lucy, who lives in rural Ireland and develops some pretty strong feelings for one of the girls in her friendship group, and they go on to have a relationship. That's not a spoiler, that happens quite early on. And I loved this book. I thought it was great. It wasn't like perfect in the sense that a lot of the characters drove me absolutely insane, as they do in Normal People. But there was something about so Lucy has these incredibly strong feelings for this female friend of hers, but she also knows that her best friend and the boy next door, Martin, loves her, and she kind of loves him in a kind of a friendly way, but maybe more than a friendly way, but definitely not to the degree that she feels for this girl. And yet she is really scared. She's scared of how her family will react if they find out that she's queer. She's scared of rocking the boat, of having a life other than the one that she expected to have and is expected to have. And I don't know, I saw Lucy is not perfect, but I saw so much of myself in her as a teenager that like I really connected with this book, and it made me bawl. So if you're up for a cry, I recommend. Then I read Baumgartner by Paul Auster, and this is exciting for me because I'm a fan of Paul Auster, but also this is the one and only physical proof I have ever been sent, where I've been approached by a publisher to say, hey, do you want a proof of a book? And I think it's because I'd posted something about Paul Auster. So this is just a nice milestone for me, a booktube baby. And yeah, this is about a man called Baumgartner who his wife Anna died, I think about, was it 10 years before the events of the book take place, and he just has not moved on. She is still everywhere in the house. He is very much still in the thick of his grief for her. And the book is sort of, parts of it are in the present day, parts of it are spurred on by his memories of when they were younger. So you kind of see them as a young couple. And also you get parts of, they were both academics, and Anna was a poet and a translator. And so you get pieces of writing that he's reading that he's like dug out of her office and stuff. So you also get this really kind of intimate sense of who she is outside of just his remembrance of her. And look, I mean, Paul Auster isn't for everyone, and I do know that, and I do know a lot of people really didn't like 4321, although I did. But I really like his writing style. It works for me. Absolutely nothing really happens in this book. It is kind of a bit navel-gazy, but I really don't mind that in a book. It doesn't have the playfulness necessarily of the New York trilogy, which I think is still my favorite book by him. But yeah, I liked it. I think it is a really it was a really nuanced portrayal of sort of the long-term impact of grief. I think there are quite a few books that look at kind of grief in the immediate aftermath of a loss, but this is a man, obviously, as I said, many years down the line, who is still struggling to conceive of a life without his partner. And yeah, I thought it was great. Then I read another ebook. I read The Satsuma Complex by Bob Mortimer. I went into this suspecting that it possibly was not going to be the greatest work of fiction in the world, and it wasn't, but I had a lovely time. So Bob Mortimer is one of my favourite comedians. I have a real soft spot for him. And this is a sort of mystery comedy. It sort of reminded me, like, if you imagine Bob Mortimer doing like a take on Dirk Gently, but where Dirk Gently isn't actually an investigator and actually has no idea how to do anything. So maybe that's not the best comparison, but I think I'm feverish from how much chocolate I've eaten today. So never mind, we'll just let that pass us by. But yeah, I did enjoy it. It did, like, some of the plot was a little bit clunky. I think it was a little bit long for what we were covering. But did it feel like Bob Mortimer was reading me a bedtime story? Yes. Am I here for that? Yes. So, and then finally, the last book I read this month was Leave the World Behind by Rumaan. And I just snuck reading this book in. I've wanted to read this for ages. I think since Jen mentioned it. It was one of her favourite, Jen Campbell, who I don't actually know. I shouldn't just be like Jen, like she's my pal. Person who I admire on the internet, Jen Campbell. Read it, was it last year or the year before? And it was one of her favourite books of the year, and I generally just trust her opinion. And yeah, this is about a family who drive out to the Hamptons and rent a house, and they think they're going to have this perfect holiday. And I'm sorry if you can hear my dog barking. That's my partner's curry arriving. I'm gonna carry on speaking anyway because I'm so close to finishing this video and then being able to lie down that I can't pause, okay? So just deal with the barking, I'm so sorry. This is, yeah, a family go out to the Hamptons and things sort of start to happen, and then this couple arrive and knock on their door and say, hi, this is our house, something's going on, you need to let us in. And from there, it is a weird sort of creepy, potentially disastery book. And I'm not going to talk too much more about it because I read this specifically because there is a film adaptation coming out. By the time you're watching this, if you're watching this on the day that it goes up, I think in 2 days' time, it's going to be released on Netflix. And I'm going to be talking about this in a new series on my channel where I read a book and then watch an adaptation of it, whether that's film or TV, and this is the first one that I'm doing. I will be joined in that episode by my best friend Farmer, who you may have seen in this video. And yes, so that will be next week's video. So I'm not going to talk too much more about this, but quick spoiler is I really liked it. It's one of my favourite books of the year. And that's that. That's been November. Please let me know in the comments down below what you read in November. Did you get to any non-fiction in November? And what are you planning for your December reading? Is that the month where you do a lot of rereads? I think I'm going to do some rereads. I like to revisit His Dark Materials audiobooks around Christmas time. So I think I'm going to do that. But I also have a few books that I'm planning on getting to from authors that I haven't read any work from before but think I'm going to love. So you'll have stuff like that coming from me in the coming weeks. And yeah, just generally, I'm nosy. Let me know what you've been reading in the comments down below. And if you're new here, please do give this video a like if you indeed did like it. If you didn't and you stayed to the end, that's interesting behavior on the internet, but you do you. And if you want to check out the video for next week about the Leave the World Behind adaptation, then you might want to subscribe to my channel. That's all of the shameless plugging. Tatty bye.